You're connected to Business Wrap, inspiring ideas that propel the business community forward. Today, gain a deeper understanding of business during part one of our roundtable discussion with Tony Cuthbert. Hear daily communication advice from Phil Zeller of Dale Carnegie, Michigan. Consume news that impacts business with Michael Patrick Shields. And join us for the conclusion of our roundtable discussion. In studio now, Tony Cuthbert.
And today, part one will consist of investing in single-family homes here on the Business Wrap. The experts you will hear today are
Kim Lafayette with Coldwell Banker Hubble Briarwood and the Lafayette team.
Luke Mardigian with the Farm Bureau Insurance, the Mardigian Agency.
John Mashney with Foster Swift, Collins & Smith Attorneys.
Scott Danek, Equanimity Wealth Management with securities offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, and advisory services offered through CWM, LLC, and SEC, Registered Investment Advisor, a separate entity. You missed that, didn't you?
I missed that, Scott. Could you do that again?
No, I got to take a breath.
We are short on time,
That's
so
my
good work.
workout for the day.
Good work, Scott. Thank you for that. After the economic downturn, investing in single-family homes may sound like an attractive idea, but there are many considerations that wise investors make before choosing these properties. Kim, I guess as the real estate expert in this room, what are we talking about and what do we need to consider?
Well, when you're looking at your investment portfolio, including your stocks, your IRAs, all of that kind of stuff that's in there, it's not a bad idea to consider real estate as a separate entity as part of this. When you're looking at real estate, there used to be a thing where real estate values never went down. Well, we know that's not true anymore. So it's a little bit more complicated, I guess, today than it used to be, because you could always account on if you spent $100,000 on something, it would be worth $120 or something by the time you wanted to sell it. Knowing that's not the case now, it's imperative that you make sure that you're making a right decision. And I always ask people, the first question before they want to purchase any form of real estate is why? What is your purpose? And so that's the first thing that I think that you should consider if you are looking at having real estate as part of your investment portfolio. You need to know the why. Are you looking for immediate cash flow? Are you looking for capital appreciation down the road? Are you looking for a place? I've got some clients that just recently bought a little house in East Lansing for their daughter to live in while she's going to MSU, as opposed to having to stay in the dorm room. So know your why. There's over 95,000 homes for sale in the state of Michigan right now. So there's a lot of inventory it seems like a lot of inventory to choose from, but actually the market right now is very lax on inventory. We don't have a whole lot in individual markets. And so what that's doing is that's pushing the prices up. So now may or may not be a good time to buy that. Again, you've got to make really sure that you're doing the right thing and going in the right direction.
And Kim, this is Scott with Equanimity Wealth Management. I think not only the why, and maybe this is part of it, but also just, how much time do people have? Because, usually our experience has been with clients that when they own real estate as an investment, and I'm talking about more than just a piece of land. It's one thing to buy a lot out on Lake Michigan or, one of the great inland lakes, so to speak, because that's not going to call you in the middle of the night with problems, either with the house or with the water heater or something like that. So someone, I think, also needs to have the time in the proverbial day to be, especially when they're starting. It's one thing, you hear about these folks that have tons of investment property. Well, they usually have people that help them manage it. When you're just starting out, it's usually you that's managing it, at least if you're going to get any kind of a return whatsoever. So I think that's also something that people need to consider. These folks you mentioned with the daughter who's at Michigan State, well, they probably don't have little ones at home anymore. They're probably not driving kids around to soccer practice and basketball and band and all the things that parents do when they have young kids. Well, imagine lobbing on top of that, needing to do something, either fix-its or what have you. So I think it's also important for people to consider their lifestyle and whether it fits with something that is probably at first going to take a fair amount of work.
That's true, Scott. There's when you get started, when you get started in any venture, it's always good to have key people around you. So your first key person would be a good realtor who could actually show you the pros and the cons, and work the numbers for you to let you know whether this is a wise investment. Because just walking in and going, oh, this is a really nice place, I really like this, really doesn't enter into the picture. You're looking at the numbers. So you could be purchasing something that is in the nicest neighborhood around, but if you're spending too much on that particular property and it doesn't have a good rental history in that area, it's not really a good idea to go into. So having somebody who is familiar with the numbers and what to look for in an investment property is imperative.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, this is John, one thing that I've talked with many clients about is exactly what you said, Kim, about having a goal, but then also taking the next step and saying, what's going to be my strategy? And I think there's a difference there. The goal could be, I want to create a retirement income in 30 years. Or the goal could be, I want to create some passive income through rentals and things like that. The goal could be short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains through rehabbing and then selling at a profit. I think the strategy is also really important to go back to thinking about your own time. How much time are you going to have? How much money? What type of return would you like? And then that leads to building the team. I tell people all the time, the most important thing that you do when you start is build your team, people around you. If you're going to take a more active role in your investments, which that's exactly what this is, you're taking a more active role in your investments, you need to get experts around you in every single area. You can't do everything. And I think that's the step that I say, if you haven't done that, then it's not time to spend your money, right? A fool and his money are soon parted. I think that's exactly that applies here.
So John, what are some examples of experts that they could get around them in the short term?
I think the first people, real estate agent, absolutely. You need a financial advisor that has experience dealing with these types of investments. Insurance agent, banker, or someone that's going to give you access to money if you're going to go down that route. Obviously, attorney, even accountant. You need to make sure that you have an accountant that understands the bookkeeping side of real estate, also the tax side of real estate, and will help you understand that there's benefits across the board. And then just to go back to the time, if you're not wanting to manage, you're going to have to find a property management company or a property manager, right? So there's all these groups of people that you need to build as part of your team. And I think what I really counsel people to do is have this in place before you buy your first property.
That's so wise. I mean, you like you said, Scott, you get a call in the middle of the night and you've got a plumbing problem. If you've got somebody that you can call and say, hey, Joe from Joe's Plumbing, I got a problem at 123 Main Street. Can you get out there right now? I mean, you've got to have that unless you know what you're looking at when you get out there, or you don't want to be bothered. So there's a lot of different considerations really to look at that. And I'm curious, Luke, on the insurance aspect of it. I know that insurance is a lot different for rental properties than it is for single-family homes, your personal residence. How should that weigh in?
So surprisingly, there's a lot of similarities between the two as far as it's a house, right? So house burns down, we rebuild it. The differences come in when you start talking about the micro picture financially. So macro is kind of what John and Scott were referring to as far as, okay, your 401ks are maxed out, your IRAs are maxed out, you're looking for another avenue. Okay, so you have some income stream, but what about your home, this new investment property that Kim sold you is now in shambles. It's in ashes. It's in the basement. For 6 months, we're going to be paying, as an insurance company, paying to rebuild that. But do you have 6 months reserve to maybe pay that mortgage that you used to buy the investment property? Well, there's some coverage. It's a coverage called loss of rents, that if that property does burn down, your insurance company can actually step in and kind of take care of that macro piece. So you're not dipping into your emergency funds. You're not taking away from other investment strategies in the short term while you have this issue. And there's some other considerations such as protecting yourself financially on a macro level. You have those investments. You have other strategies going on. What if your tenant does something that gets you sued? Are you protected there? So there's liability for your homeowners, but there's a totally different type of liability that comes into play when you're actually trusting tenants with your property. And if they do something that causes you to get sued, are you going to have the backing of an insurance company's checkbook rather than your own?
So, Luke, really, this is Scott with Equanimity Wealth Management. One of the things you brought up, you probably want to have some liquidity because, not just the house burning down, that's obviously something that would be an insurable event. But these fix-its, tenants invariably usually don't treat the property as if it's their own. That's just not to throw all renters under a bus, but it's just human nature. I mean, when you rent a car or when you're on vacation, it's not quite the same as when you're driving your own. So you would want to have, to your point, not just the money that you've, as you said, maxed out in your 401k and your IRA, but also probably have some money that's accessible in the bank or a taxable account, things like that, so that if there are needs that arise throughout, because a lot of people think of it as, well, I'll just use my rents. Well, especially if you weren't able to buy this property with cash, there's going to be a mortgage. There's going to be property taxes. There's going to be costs that are just going on. So it's usually once you get 2, 3, 4 homes into it where you can start to say, hey, my existing portfolio of real estate is providing me with that liquidity. But at first, you really want to have some cash on hand so that as things come up, because, if you all of a sudden start saying, well, I'll just take care of that with a credit card, or I'll get a home equity line on my existing home that I live in. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you can either make it work well or compound as a really bad snowball down the wrong side of the hill. So I'd say liquidity is key.
And this is Kim, and you need to take into account that not all tenants will pay their bills when they're due. And so if you don't get rent that month and you're anticipating that you're going to use that to make the payment, then you're going to be in a heap of trouble, because you don't want your credit now, because this applies towards your credit score and everything else. So if your credit score starts to go down as a result of something that you don't have any control over because you didn't have a plan in place before you purchased this property, now you're going to start paying more for insurance because your credit score is not as good right now. It may be difficult for you to get a car loan, to get your own home loan. So you can't rely on that. I always tell people I want to see at least 3 months worth of reserves that you have set aside, in addition to the typically 20 to 25% down payment that you have to make on a rental property that is anywhere from 1 to 4 units. And so that you've got that money set aside. So if there is something that you have to pay for, people don't realize many times they go out and they find something they like, they buy it, it's a nice property, and then they realize that within that community they needed to get a rental license. And so now they don't have this rental license and they're getting fines because of that. Rental licenses can vary. I've seen them as high as $1,200. I've seen them as low as $200. So it depends upon the community. So again, there's different factors and considerations to take into effect. And the main thing is to figure out your why, know your strategy, like what John mentioned, and surround yourself with experts in that particular arena so that you know that you're going into this with your eyes wide open.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think this is Luke with Farm Bureau. To both Kim and Scott's points, the liquidity factor, I find that a lot of clients get into the investment property a little too quickly, too early in their portfolio. They're not looking at more traditional investing methods. And that becomes dangerous because in the insurance world, we find many landlords who get in too early, who don't have enough liquidity, end up using insurance as their liquidity, which is not what that is intended for, right? Insurance is intended for sudden, unexpected events that you can't control. You can't control the toilet going out, but you can kind of expect that the toilet is probably going to break at some point on one of your properties. In the history of man, it's happened thousands of times. And so understanding the difference between managing your own risk, okay, so and what you need to transfer to the insurance company. So there's a retention of risk, and then there's a transfer of risk. And the only way that you can do that is to be in a financial situation where you can manage both of them, one with insurance and one with your own funds.
In all of this, it sounds like, oh my gosh, this sounds like a scary proposition to get into, but it's not really. It's if you have a plan going in place, you know the objective that you want to cover. But one of the things that you're going to want to consider is right now our market rents are going up because there's, over the past 10 or 12 years, there has been fewer homes that have been built, but the population is continuing to rise. And so people need a place to live. And that's why you see so many apartment buildings being built all over the place right now, because there was a lack of construction going on during these past 10 years during the Great Recession. So you've got an opportunity there. However, prices are rising as well. So you have to be able to look at it from both standpoints. Are you looking for capital appreciation, where you plan to hang on to this, like Robert Kiyosaki from Rich Dad, Poor Dad says, buy and never sell? Or are you looking for a month-to-month income?
Let's take a break, and then we will close out this conversation here at the end of the Business Wrap. You can always check out what's going on here in the studio, Facebook Live, and our website, businesswrap.biz.
You're connected to Business Wrap, inspiring ideas that propel the business community forward. Now, the conclusion of our roundtable discussion with Tony Cuthbert.
And investing in single-family homes is the topic today, joined in studio by a panel of experts, and they are
Kim Lafayette with Coldwell Banker Hubble Briarwood and the Lafayette team.
Luke Mardigian with the Mardigian Agency, Farm Bureau Insurance.
John Mashney with the law firm of Foster Swift, Collins & Smith.
Scott Danek, Equanimity Wealth Management.
So we hit a few of the considerations for investing in single-family homes. Let's get into how to find the right properties and the case for investing in these homes. Kim, make the case. How do we go about this?
Well, you've made the decision. You want to do this. You put your strategy in place. What do you want? Do you want capital appreciation? In other words, that you buy something for $100 and down the road sell it for $150 or whatever? or are you looking more for a monthly cash flow situation, or both? And you can get both, obviously. But so now you've got your strategy in place. You've surrounded yourself with people, with the experts that you need, your proper insurance agent, your financial advisor, your attorney, a good CPA would be a good idea, tradespeople that you know that you can rely upon, and, of course, you're a good real estate agent, somebody that knows rental properties in the community that you're looking at. So now you decide that, okay, this is what we've got, and of course, a mortgage banker if you're going to not pay cash for the property. So now you've got your key people in place, you've got your strategy in place. Now what you need to look at is, how do you find something? Well, a lot of that is going to go right along with what your strategy is. So if you're looking for something, say, for example, to purchase something in a college town, you need to understand that there's only so many rental licenses that are allowed in many communities. And I'm going to speak to East Lansing. I'm sure that Ann Arbor has a similar one in many of these other areas. But if you cannot get a single-family property licensed, it's a moot point to try to purchase it. And that rental license is worth something. So the property that you purchase, if it already has a rental license on it, that price is going to be increased because that license is valuable. It's almost like having a liquor license if you are looking to open up an establishment that wants a liquor license. That is another asset that goes with that property. So you're going to end up paying for that. So what you might want to consider then is, if that's out of your price range, you might want to consider just out of that community, but still maybe on a bus route that might take students to that community. So you don't have to worry about that. But there are still rental registrations, not necessarily licenses, but rental registrations that you have to make. So again, look and see what that particular community is going to charge for that. You need to now start putting together all of the costs of the purchase. So you've got your banker, and you know that you're going to have to put, say, 20% down, and you know what, that's going to what that's going to amount to. You have your 3 months reserves, so you've got money in reserves. Now is a good idea to talk with an insurance agent. Call your insurance agent and find out what kind of insurance costs you should be looking at. And Luke, tell me how that plays into all this.
It is a wide, varied range depending on the coverages you need. The pricing is actually very similar to a homeowner's policy, so it's not extravagant. You're not paying $10,000 for a $50,000 house to insure it, but it can have a slightly increased cost over your normal homeowners. And the reason for that is because it has coverages built in to protect you from the extra liability that comes with having this property. And there's really a couple decisions that you have to go through. The first one is how you want to insure the dwelling. There's something called replacement cost, and there's something called actual cash value. And to not get too insurance ease on you, essentially replacement cost is we rebuild it exactly as it is today up to the policy limits. Actual cash value is very similar to market price. So if you pay for a refurbished property that you're going to put some cash into and you only have 20 or 30 grand into it, that may be the way to go with it. And that would reduce your insurance costs, which is, of course, going to be one of your bigger out-of-pocket expenses on this property. And then some of the other considerations is how much liability should you have? So as a general broad stroke, everybody's unique, obviously, but as a general broad stroke, you want more liability insurance than your net worth or your net assets at risk. And so typically I put $500,000 in coverage is what I'd recommend in liability. And then most of my property owners like to have an umbrella policy on top of that, which provides an additional $1 million of liability that typically applies to all the properties that they own, with very few conditions that it won't apply. And, one of the best ways to protect yourself from that liability, and it comes up often in my conversations, my clients will say things like, hey, Luke, I bought this property. I want to insure it. My agent says I can't insure it because it's in my company's name. It's in my limited liability, my LLC. And can you take care of that? And that's something we can take care of. But, John, would you mind just speaking to what an LLC is, why that's important when it comes to risk management?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you're assessing legal liability, that's where you should absolutely be talking to an attorney. And I think when you look at all investing, any type of investing, the most successful people who invest are the people who actually treat it like a business. Even if it's not a business per se, or even for tax purposes, you treat it like a business. And business owners have to look at the risk that's inherent in their activities, right? And, a common kind of synonym for tenant is also plaintiff, right? Which is someone who's going to file a lawsuit against you. And just by owning property, there's something called premises liability, right? The owner of the property is liable for someone getting injured on the property or certain activities that happen on the property. So as an owner, you are liable for what happens on your property. So how do you mitigate that risk? Well, absolutely, you need to be thinking about insurance. You need to insure the property itself. An umbrella policy protects you personally for your personal liabilities. So what about entities, right? That's the question that people always ask. And many times, because of the financing method, the lender will require you to own it in your personal name or yours and your spouse's name. That doesn't mean that you can't necessarily deed that property into an LLC. But what an LLC does is it presumably, as long as you follow the right formalities, it insulates the liability to the assets of that entity only and not the owners of that entity. Typically, that's how entities work. The owners are insulated from the liabilities that are strictly due to the entity's property. That doesn't mean that you can never be liable. So, for instance, if you don't treat your LLC or your entity as a separate entity, then you could be liable because the courts will look at that as basically it's a sham transaction where you're only having this entity just for show, essentially. But with good advice, it's relatively easy to follow those formalities. So an LLC or an entity will insulate the liability between you and your property. The other thing to think about with an LLC, which liability is the biggest piece, but there's also a piece that people don't often think about, is privacy. An LLC can give you privacy. Many times, at least in Michigan, it's a great aspect of entities in Michigan is that, at least for an LLC, you don't have to disclose publicly the owner of the LLC. So if you get an angry tenant, what are they going to do? If they're somewhat savvy, which many tenants are, they can go online on the state of Michigan website and find out who owns this entity or who owns the property, right? You can look at property records, right? Go to various townships. It's online or it's available for a small fee. You can see who owns property, especially it's really easy if it's in someone's individual name. So now they'll also find your address on the deed. So think about that. If you're operating as a business, maybe the privacy aspect is going to be important to you. So again, and this is from personal experience. One of my clients called me and said, my tenant sent me a letter to my house. And think about that. Is that part of your strategy, right? Do you want to have your name and address be accessible? If you're talking to me, no way, right? I want to have an insulation between the property and the individual. So I think the entity structure is going to matter a lot. And also you think about what assets are at risk. If you own it in your personal name, all of your assets titled in your name are at risk. If that doesn't make you want to at least talk to an attorney or talk to your other team of advisors, then I'm not sure what else we could say.
Now, John, this is Scott with Equanimity Wealth Management. Let's say that this first purchase is very successful. So someone has whet their appetite for it, and they want to make another purchase. And let's say it's a different property, different address, and let's say they have the first property in an LLC. Sounds like from what you just said, too, that you wouldn't name it in your own family name, Real Estate LLC. You'd want to be somewhat cryptic. So let's say it's me, and I want to buy a second property. Do I just throw it in that first LLC, meaning own it with that first LLC, or do I perhaps set up another LLC, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's two ways of thinking about it. And I don't think we're going to give blanket advice that's going to apply in every situation.
Sure.
But you can obviously put it in another LLC and get that protection. And then each LLC's property is separate, so it's insulated. However, it can be expensive if you're going to form an LLC every single time you buy a new property. So what I generally will talk through and think about and point out is that look at it this way. Here's one way to think about it. Put a certain amount of equity into each LLC or each entity. And once the entity reaches a certain amount of equity, then get a new entity. And what I mean by equity is this. It's the amount, the value of the property minus any encumbrances, minus the loans that you have on that property. So for instance, you might buy a $200,000 property, but you have a loan of $150,000 on it. So your equity is $50,000. So if someone's going to come after the assets of that entity, they're only going to be able to get, at most, $50,000. So now, if we're determining the amount of equity in that LLC, it's $50,000. So if you want to determine your risk, it's $50,000. But one thing to think about is as you pay down that mortgage or pay down that loan that's subject to the mortgage, the equity is actually going up. So you just have to come up with a number that's personal to you that you feel comfortable keeping in an LLC. One of my clients, it's $250,000. But you have to make that determination yourself.
So it's sort of back to the old axiom of what can you afford to lose?
Exactly right.
So,
Well, Scott, this is Kim, and I see a lot of people, many folks come to me and they want to buy investment properties. And I ask them first, do they have an IRA? Do they have what we look at as the traditional? Do you have any sort of take on how much they should have set aside in what I call a traditional retirement kind of situation before they venture into something like a single-family home investment?
well, I'd sort of go back to Luke's comment before. He used the term maxed out. Maxed out isn't in terms of the value you have in those, it's how much you can contribute. So, for example, if I'm under age 50, I can, in most cases, put $18,000, now next year it'll be $18,500 into a 401k. If I'm over age 50, which is often where a lot of people are in this conversation, then they can put away $24,000 per year. So if I'm putting in the most I can there, and then let's say I'm doing a non-deductible traditional IRA, maybe I'm converting it, maybe I'm not, but let's say I'm putting in that his and her IRA, that could be potentially another $13,000 a year I'm putting in there. When I'm maxed out in that regard, when I'm looking around and I say, geez, I've got extra discretionary income that I want to use as an investment, where can I put it? So I wouldn't look at it as if somebody has a $100,000 IRA and $500,000 in a 401k, because really that's not all that accessible for this discussion anyway. So it could be you have $5 in there, you could have $5 million. The point is, if you have extra discretionary cash flow, then you're looking for a place to invest it, and you are probably also in a position where getting your 3 months of cushion, it's probably already there. Okay. And the ability to overcome the hurdles as you sort of hit certain road bumps, or all of a sudden, you talk to an attorney and go, yeah, you know what, I should have an LLC. And then, not that they're super expensive to set up, but still, it's a cost that you would incur. So I look at it as, if you're looking around and you just don't know where to put, and that's, of course, assuming however you want to educate your kids, assuming you want to educate your kids, that money's set aside, money for weddings, et cetera. I mean, you sort of want to be, in my opinion, at a point where you say, you know what, I need extra places to stuff money. This might be a place I could do that.
And you could, when I look at it in my particular situation, I bought my first rental property before I was married, before I bought my first single-family home. I was still renting somewhere, but I saw the value of it. And so I purchased a single-family home and started renting that out. Now, unfortunately, I did not have all the wisdom that I see around this table right now, but it still worked out to be okay for me. And the one thing that I appreciated about having that was when I got into a position where I needed maybe some cash for something, I knew that I could sell that. I would have to pay either a long-term or short-term capital gains tax on that, figured into my sale price. But I was able to get my money out of that without necessarily having to pay it back into what traditionally would be an IRA or a 401k.
Sure.
So I had that money available there to me, and there were times over the years that I think I've sold 3 of the purchases that I had purchased over the years for different reasons, and I was able to just pay the tax and then move on to something else. So again, it all boils down to your strategy and what your why is.
So there you have it, the case for investing in single-family homes here on the Business Wrap. A big thank you to our experts today, and they were
Kim Lafayette with Coldwell Banker Hubbell Briarwood and the Lafayette team.
Luke Mardigian, the Mardigian Agency, Farm Bureau Insurance.
John Mashney with the law firm of Foster, Swift, Collins & Smith.
Scott Danek, Equanimity Wealth Management.
As always, a lot of information on this edition. Go to our website, businesswrap.biz, for more. My name is Tony Cuthbert. A big thank you to the producer of this program, Morgan Hall, and we close each show with our founder, Suzanne Heward, and she says...
That's a wrap.